Welcome back to Viljandi, Estonia. I'm continuing my overview of the piece that I've been working on while in artistic residence here at the Quite Theatre. Again, thanks to all my Patreons for helping me make the trip out here, and thanks to Dr. Pinchbeck for inviting myself and some visual artists to visit Estonia and to work on some music. So last time around, I'd given you guys an idea of what the percussion parts are being triggered by the trigger riot, the plucked sound from my little mini tall dog's braids module that gets its pitches from the quantizer and from the Disting Turing machine. And then lastly, we had a listen to the bass sound coming from the shapeshifter oscillator B and into the Polaris and then Doepfer VCAs. So next up, I've got a chordal sound. And the chordal sound is made up of tightly voiced triads that come out of, it's kind of buried under cables, and it's the Sound Hack Make Noise Telharmonic. It's a great, very, very cool digital oscillator that does some really interesting things. And one of the things that it does in spades is diatonically based three-part harmonies that you can control with voltages. And then it gives you outputs, like a polyphonic chordal output. And I'm sending that output into one of my favorite little Doepfer A121 mini filters. I've got a bunch of those filters actually in this rig, 3 or 4 of them. So they kind of we'll hear them. They're all over the place. And then I'm using the trigger riot to trigger the IntelliGel Quadrax, and that's creating a tight little envelope, punchy little envelope that goes into the VCA but also controls the filter so that I get a nice almost sort of percussive sounding chordal part. And then I'm using the left side Doepfer antenna to open up that filter. So then we'll hear it open up. So here's what that chordal part sounds like. So it's a cool little sound. So then, of course, it begs the question, how do I get the chords to change? And that's what's so cool about this module. For those of you who know it, you'll recognize right away that it has an input, a CV input that changes the voicing. So really what it's doing is changing the inversion of the chord or even changing it to be double stop, so just like a little 2-note chord or even just a single note instead of a chord. But it also has another set of CVNs on the right hand side that will basically take the root of that chord and move it up through a diatonic scale. And then of course you get the harmonies that would be built on that new root note. So in the key of C, it'll do a C major triad, a D minor triad, E minor triad, F major triad, G major triad, a B diminished triad, and then back to a C major triad. And it'll cover a couple of octaves of that. So then in order to get it to change chords in a musically useful pattern, what I've done is a little trick, and this shows up in some of the literature and some of the books about modular music making, including Radio Koala's amazing X without Y, if I'm saying that right, please forgive me if I'm not, where he talks about using voltages, like voltage gates, to build up and create sequences. And that's what I'm doing here. You probably can't see the lights, but I'm running the new version of the dope for clock divider, the A160-2, and I'm running it in its sort of regular clock dividing mode, so it runs a little bit like the A160, the original one. But you can see that these gates, I've got it in gate mode, so the gates come on and stay on for half of their cycle, and then I take those out and I use them in a mixer that can sum CVs, and then they create a staircase changing voltage that then goes into that CV in. So it's a little bit like creating a sequence from these gates. So then if the gates were doing different things, then like a different set of sequenced voltages will hit that CV in, and I'll get different chord patterns. And then I can change up the chord patterns simply by changing the amount of that CV in, but also changing its base value, which chord it starts on when it's seeing 0 volts. So it ends up being quite a simple way to get musical patterns out of it. In the same way that I originally wanted to experiment with polyrhythms, I also thought I wanted to experiment with polychords. So then the other thing that I've added to this case, like I often will in some of my cases, is I'm using the other half of the shapeshifter, which is oscillator A, and it is the more powerful half, and I'm using it with its own built-in vocoder. The shapeshifter has an amazing sounding vocoder in it, 256 bands, and you can vocode the internal oscillator, or you can flip it around the other way and use the internal waveforms to vocode an external audio signal that's going in. But in my case, what I'm doing is I'm running a little headset microphone into a Pico. It's an Ericsson Pico envelope, and it basically gives you an external input with an envelope output and a triggered gate, and then it gives you an audio out at an amplified level high enough to drive modular. So it's perfect if you want to, like, say, plug guitar, bass gear, or microphones or audio sources into modular gear. And I've been using one of the dope for 8 HP modules that does the same kind of a thing, but this one comes in a 3 HP size, so it's perfect for my little case. So then my microphone signal comes in there, comes all the way around here, goes into shapeshifter in, and then it gives me a vocoder output. So then what I did is I set the chords in the vocoder to either be unisons or to be triads or even seventh chords, and in this case I'm using minor seventh chords, and then I'm using a similar sequencing tactic here on the bottom of my clock divider. I'm coming out of that lowest clock there, and I'm going into the dope for A151 switch, and I'm running it in 4 mode. So I'm basically sending 2 sets of voltages into the 1 volt per octave input on the shapeshifter, so it's changing my minor 7th chords. So in this case, I've got it tuned to a D minor 7 chord, and then it goes up to an A minor 7th chord. So it's diatonically in harmony with what's going on in the other parts of the patch, including the tel harmonic. But at any given time, I'm going to get polychords because the chords from the tel harmonic are moving in a different way and much faster. So we can hear what the vocoder does just by bringing it up in the mixer. So now you're hearing a combination of me speaking in air and a combination of the vocoder in the studio room through the speakers, and you can hear that it changes. So I'm just going to bring up one of my drum sounds, and I'll kind of sing along with it, and you'll hear it changing in time. Cha 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 cha. But the speed at which the vocoder changes can also be controlled by what's going on with my clock signals and my trigger riot. So if I go to one of my less active trigger riot programs, then the vocoder should take twice as long to change. Cha 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 cha. So then I'm using the vocoder to either add in sustaining chords underneath the melodies, or I'm using the vocoder to add in little kind of percussive things that have pitch to them, like I've done in a number of my other pieces. Well, thanks so much for checking this out. Stay tuned as I get into some of the other parts of my patch from Viljandi, Estonia. Special thanks to my Patreons. Please consider joining my Patreon to help me make more weird music as I travel around recording more albums. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again.